Okay, who would like to start the process? Yes, up at the back there.
Yes, I have a general question about the phrase making nature visible or more visible. That's a central concept in the UNEP agenda for green economy and in the natural capital initiatives. I want to ask what that means in relation to local communities which have already been valuing and even maintaining nature as they understand it. And just give two examples. For the case of biodiversity offsetting, which was mentioned by WWF, I mean, these schemes have become controversial, well, in this country as well as in the global south, where people nearby have been involved for a long time in maintaining and perhaps making visible the natural resources on which they depend for their existence and livelihoods. So I want to ask, how does your involvement try to understand their visibility, nature's visibility for local communities, and incorporate that understanding into any discussions? And the other example, now I realize that the Nestle speaker deals mainly with this country, but in some parts of the world, especially India, there have been mass protests against Nestle's practices of using and polluting large quantities of water. So for those communities, nature, again, has been visible and is being made visible by them. So how does Nestle deal with those communities?
Can okay, I'll start off with the visibility question. The one in the UK I can answer because I'm directly responsible for that, but I will answer the second part as well. How do we bring on, in Buxton this month, we've got an open forum for all our community members, for everyone in the community. We've hired a hotel and said, right, anybody who wants to come in can come in, and there's a whole discussion. So that's one of the approaches we've taken, is this open forum approach, where saying, come in and tell us what your views are. Working very closely with the Wildlife Trust, working very closely with universities, is giving that feedback in. But equally, we've set up committees as well of local residents who talk to us on a regular basis about our environmental impact. So those are the models we've taken here, and those are the models that we go. In terms of models overseas, I think in terms of water, water is really quite important to us, and like I said, and I think approaches across the globe are taking similar steps. Now, it depends on how fast they're going or what things. I can't really answer for that one there. But I do know there's a real commitment to get it right, and our natural capital commitment and our water commitment make it essential that local people are involved in this process.
I'll try and give an example from the world of public health, in particular the world of local public health in this country. And I'm conscious that public health work is different in different countries. But as I mentioned before, around this country and 150 or so local authorities, the Director of Public Health and his or her team have responsibilities for the health of the population, but also, being based in local government, responsibilities, shared responsibilities around environment, transport, and so forth. And one of the things that I've been arguing for and progressing when I spent 5 years as a local director of public health in Camden is that in the work that those local directors do for their local communities around environmental issues, it's not just about improving the environment in terms of health for humans, because then you end up just focusing on local air pollution, a local factory that produces some toxins. They're all important, but you end up focusing very narrowly on the environment in terms of, as I said, an instrument for the local population's health. Instead, that Director of Public Health can also use their position and influence to preserve and promote the value of the environment in their local community. That's something we try to do in Camden, and I've been writing about and trying to progress around the country.
Anybody else want to contribute?
So I think biodiversity offsets was mentioned, so I thought I'd better respond. But just on the visibility and stakeholder engagement, I think there are fundamental principles around co-management which, outside of the UK, WWF particularly is involved with. I think similarly in the standards that we set, it's often done with engagement with other civil society groups than our own, social standards within forestry stewardship certification and so forth. So I think there's a number of ways to ensure that the nature visible, the flip side of which I understood from the question was around local communities' knowledge and attachment to nature, and to ensure that that is part of it. I think on the point I was trying to make about the biodiversity offsets, and it's controversial because there's a risk and a number of examples where it's used as an excuse to trash. So it's okay. And offsetting fundamentally, you know, it's transferring one set of damage from one place to another, whether it's carbon or otherwise. So there's a risk. And my point was that we need to try and set the bar higher than no net loss. Trying to set the bar at the policy level, net gain for biodiversity as well as economic, or as part of economic development processes. The issues about how do we ensure that biodiversity offsets are only the last step in good management practice is a different matter, but I understand that controversy.
Just briefly, an example, we did a study a few years ago looking at the value of coastal mangrove wetlands in Indonesia and Malaysia. And one of the interesting findings of that work was that the values that were identified for the benefits that local communities got, unmarketed benefits that local communities got from those sites, were about 6 times as high as the value of the marketed products like timber, like some other, I forget now, some other products that were being extracted. They were about, you know, so even those local community benefits, just putting a value on them, told a compellingly different story.
Great question, halfway down near the gangway there. Yeah.
Hello, I've got a question for Professor Kessel, really. I was wondering if you could comment on how you make decisions when something that is in the long-term public and ecological good may not necessarily be in the interests of the individual. So I'm thinking, firstly, you know, antibiotics resistance. You know, I take my son to the doctors and they say, well, just in case, have some antibiotics. But more generally, if we're talking about public health nutrition and what might be desirable from an ecological point of view, what we should be, what sort of guidance should be given, there may be trade-offs at the individual level. There'll be lots of synergies as well, but at the individual level, there will be some trade-offs. And at the moment, the focus is very much on the individual rather than on the societal ecological value. And I'm just wondering how you could see that being resolved, or whether it never will be.
I hope it will be. That is at the heart of public health work, the trade-off, as you say, between individuals' interests and community interests or population interests. It's part and parcel of all the areas of work we're involved in. I mean, climate change would be an obvious example. Individual pursuits lead to certain courses of action that are not often not in the interests of the population and the future populations. What we try to do in our public health work is encourage people to move away from the social atomism that Mary Midgley talks about, that we operate in these as individuals rather than collectives for the reasons I've described. Around something like antimicrobial resistance, we've got a campaign at the moment called Antibiotic Guardian. If Google Antibiotic Guardian. It's about making a pledge, whether you're an individual, a pet owner, because a huge amount of antibiotics are prescribed in animals, more in animals than in humans in this country, making a pledge to monitor how you approach your practitioner, your veterinary surgeon, and how you approach your use of antibiotics. So encouraging people just to think before, when they've got a sore throat, they spend their 5 minutes with their GP pleading for an antibiotic and putting pressure on the GPs in that regard. So we're asking people to do that in the interests of society and long-term future, because the results of antimicrobial resistance are going to hit all of us. I mean, that's why the Chief Medical Officer talks about going to a post-antibiotic age where we have our hip replacements and you get an infection or complication that does not respond to the drugs, the antibiotics that would have been straightforward 10 years ago. So it's going to affect everybody. It's not easy to get people to change their behaviours collectively, but that's part and parcel, I think, of what we need to do.
Thank you. Natasha Bradshaw from WWF UK. I just want to think quickly about the link between nature and people a bit more. It's a simple question, really, to probably Will and Anthony. Is there much work to actually cost a human life? Because I think corporates will listen much more if we make the connection back to the value of human life and its connection to the value of species. You know, in terms of operating as a collective rather than individual, if we can convince people that, you know, the cost of their human life links back to the cost of nature and the value of nature, I think we've got a better chance of having an impact.
After you.
So generous. Yes, there's a huge amount of work on the cost to human life, and there's quite a sort of uncomfortable area of health economics.
Not cost to human life, the value of a human life.
Yeah, there's quite a uncomfortable, for many people, area of health economics, welfare economics, which looks at the value of a human life. There's a thing for non-economists called the value of statistical life, which some people find just a bit of a troubling concept. But those values are derived and used in health systems all around the world, and for prioritizing essentially what we do. And the valuation of the environment, impacts on the environment, often it's impacts on human health that are the greatest share of the values that are derived for those types of valuation studies. So
you've kind of answered it. There is a value.
Where was I trying to get to? Sorry, I forgot. There's a huge amount of work. What was the nub of the question? Sorry.
You've kind of answered it. There is a value being placed on it, and it has a high priority relative to other ways you're valuing.
Yeah. That was better than my answer.
Maybe I can be a little bit controversial and say perhaps the problem is that too high a value is placed on human life. I mean, I'm not for a moment suggesting we don't value each other's well-being and lives, but it's happening. So in the medical world, it's happening at huge expense on intensive care units. You know, the vast costs financially and in terms of resources and environmental damage to keeping people alive in their 90s for an extra week on intensive care units. I mean, if we're just completely honest about it. So, and that's done in the interest, as we all understand, I'm a doctor, we're drilled into us to respect the value of a human life. But it is at that huge value. I've no doubt about how much we value in the Western world human lives. But that is at the expense today in terms of future generations and the environment. So maybe that's the reorientation that needs to happen.
Question here first.
Thank you very much for your talks this morning. My name's Steve Venton. I'm here just independently. Natural capital, we're here to talk about how natural capital is used to value ecosystems and nature and how it can be used to inform better decisions. And yet, over the just to prefix that, recently the UN and WWF, of course, have reported how we are continuing to fail spectacularly to respond to the challenges that we face with biodiversity loss and climate change, still really very significant issues. Is there something different about natural capital in valuing it and in putting it into those sort of stark terms and monetary values like Will you talked about, that will help us to make better decisions and will lead to something fundamentally different to all of the things that have gone before?
I think there are two elements of it, but particularly I think the increasing interest in natural capital is a reflection of growing concern to the kind of communication and explanation about the state of the planet that is going out there and people's experience, whether through perceived impacts of climate change or you know, just people's experience is with the data, whether it's soft or very hard data. And so what we need is to accelerate that. So I think people are listening more. People can see it more. It's pretty hard to avoid, and including business. And so the dialogue is increasing. This gathering would not have happened 10 years ago. We just need to keep that interest, energy, intellectual sharpness so that we can influence those decisions to get us in the bottom of the green box that I showed earlier.
I mean, I would answer your slightly closed question with just a wholehearted yes, as in I think it can and will, and I think Glyn's point that it really makes it much harder to ignore. When you've valued your environmental externalities, for example, as a corporation, you then know, and then just as human beings, as all you know, corporate people are, there's some sense of obligation to act, and just that understanding can be helpful. Then we can move into mechanisms and incentives and changes like that. I should also say, Steve wrote a great piece in the Huffington Post the other day. It is the same Steve, right? Yes, that's right. Commend anyone to read that, because it's a really good overview of this space.
So I've already made a note to speak to Will afterwards about possibly having a natural capital assessment of Public Health England. It's the second largest national public health institute after the Americans in the world. If I use the example of climate change, where politics has completely failed in terms of climate change, and from my own sense, the only way that we'll save the planet is by social transformation, I would like to see a place where an organisation like Public Health England leads the world around in terms of socially transforming how we operate. We are already all new energy deals that we do 100% renewable. And we are about to embark on a campaign with the NHS around NHS Sustainability Day, which we're calling One Small Step, where we are asking, or will be asking, all public health workers and health workers, which is a lot of people in this country, to make one small step to play their part. It comes back to the previous question in terms of climate change, and that's by switching their own supplier, one small thing, their own supplier, to 100% renewable energy and electricity at home. There'll be a parallel piece of work around NHS and public health premises, but in terms of those thousands of people. So perhaps sort of answered your question, but I think institutions, organizations with high profile should be leading the way in terms of social transformation and using natural capital in that way.
To answer your question, I think there's positives and negatives to it. If you put a price on something, then it comes into the economic cycle, and there's benefits and negatives to it, and that's a watch out I think we have to take on, and I think that's a serious watch out, because right now you can intrinsically, as has been said, value nature without putting a price on it. And the other thing is, it's the comparison. can you compare one methodology to another? And that's going to be the tough thing. There needs to be a universal approach to this. I think that's the problem right now. We've got so many different approaches. They say different things, and there's no universality about it. And until that happens, I think it's going to be very difficult. But I think there's a watch out, a plus and a minus to it.
If I could just really quickly comment, sorry, because I wholeheartedly agree. We do have to be cautious in our application, but also I think it's important to note that putting a value, valuing something isn't the same as putting a price on it. And
that's what I'm coming to, but they can be construed as a price.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's a watch out.
Yeah, good point. Right, we have a question in the middle and one at the front, and then I'm afraid I'm going to have to draw it to a close.
Hi, my name is Emily Mackenzie. I'm with WWF and the Natural Capital Project, which is a partnership with Stanford University, the University of Minnesota, and the Nature Conservancy. And my question is to Will, although I'm more interested in the whole panel's response. But in our experience, we've worked in about 30 places applying natural capital approaches to decisions, and we found that scenarios and looking to the future, comparing alternative futures and the trade-offs amongst different bits of natural capital is essential for it to be informing decisions in a powerful way. And so I was a bit distressed and surprised to hear you say that you have not found business to be receptive to using scenarios in this context of natural capital accounting. And particularly as Shell and other businesses have pioneered scenario approaches for their own organizational strategy. So my question is why you think there is a lack of appetite for looking to the future in the context of natural capital accounting in business, and what we need to do as a community to change that.
Great question. I'm a big fan of the work of the Natural Capital Project. So, I suppose why are they not up for it? Because it's complicated and it introduces so much uncertainty, and actually there's a job of education to do for us in saying just because the future or even the values we attach today are uncertain doesn't mean that they're not useful information. And actually they're much more useful information if you understand the uncertainties that relate to them. So I think that part of it, and part of it is just an understanding amongst the key decision makers within businesses of the types of system dynamics that we're dealing with. Typically the key decision makers, the people buying this stuff, are not not well versed in ecology, and I'm not. I shouldn't pretend to be, but fortunately we've got a good team of people who are. But I get revelations every time we look at some kind of scenario of the future. So hopefully that's some kind of answer. I'm interested in everyone else's perspective as well.
Anybody else want
Especially Inder's.
I think, one, it's complexity. There's no universal approach to it. 3 is cost. It's an incredible, I don't know if Will will tell you the cost, but it's a really expensive endeavor, and you're not sure of the answers you're going to get, and that, and how they're going to be used. So, and that's why I think we're looking at academics and we're looking at universities, we're looking at civil society and saying, is there a standard we can use? Is there an approach that we can all universally apply? And we're looking at government as well, and government shouldn't be left out of this picture. They've got a big role in this. So it's not just simply of adopting one, saying this is it. I think if you want to move this thing forward, then there has to be a coalition, there has to be an agreement amongst everyone. I recently read a report by CIMA, which is the Chartered Institute of on natural capital accounting. So the accountants are beginning to look at it and seeing how they can do it. And if they can come up with standard approaches and looking at it in an accounting way, good. But if everybody right now does it, you'll get, it's similar to life cycle analysis. I work in life, and Will quite rightly said, life cycle analysis, until the ISO standard sort of started defining it, everybody was doing it but getting different answers. And now we're beginning to get some kind of a normative approach to it, even though they can still differ. But if you went on this approach right now, you'd get 10 different answers, 10 different ways of doing things, and everybody understanding differently. So, you know, that's not to say don't do something, do it, but make sure that it's an approach in the future that we can take on. And also, there's a big difference between local and a national and a global approach, and I think that's something which we have to take into account. Yeah. So my watch outs, I think I've already said, it's complexity, cost, and we do need some sort of a congruent approach. So and unless we get that congruency, then I think it's going to be difficult. You'll be comparing apples and oranges.
Alessandro Gimona, James Hutton Institute. I was just wanting to understand a bit more what's the vision regarding the valuation. So once a business has, say, valued the externalities and realized, you know, the potential impacts on, say, the environment, on communities and so on. So what follows from that, and how does that square, for example, with obligation to shareholders for profits and so on and so forth? What's the vision?
Well, again, sorry, yeah, and again, it's a good question. I mean, you can do it through a counter. You can also see with your eyes. I mean, I can see things going wrong with my eyes. I don't need. What we've done is we've brought out a lot of commitments now, which is on deforestation, on water management, water stewardship. So these are now being implemented across the space. And investors do ask us questions on it. So, you know, the investment community is beginning to wake up to it, because fundamentally, if you go back to all of this, it's about risk, and it's about how you look at risk. And investors are very, very sharp on risk. And when they see a risk coming, they wake up. And this is where this is all going. So I think it's good. There's a lot of work going on to it, and it's great that there is a movement now taking this forward. And I just hope, and what I'm praying for is this community out there comes out with something really substantial we can all use at a very low cost, and that a small SME. I mean, we work with thousands of suppliers. I would love my small SME, and ourselves, a big corporate like us can afford it, but can a small SME afford it? And that's what we need. We need that level playing field for all of us, so that we can all take part. And that's the thing. And I think there's great work being done by academics, and I applaud CI Cambridge, the work they're doing in it with us. So yes, it does have results, and the results are commitments. Commitments are visible, and they're in our commitments, and you can see them. And that's why transparency. That's one of my future. What is it we want to see in the future? We want to see more transparency. They can be questioned, challenged, and we can go forward.
If I were just to add, I'd say, I mean, the vision is, once you've quantified it, manage on the basis of it. And I think your question is shrewd, that presents some challenges sometimes for some businesses when it conflicts with their financial performance. But actually, for organizations that don't depend on creating externalities to make money, you know, they are just an unfortunate side effect of production. Quite often, some management that costs nothing or very little can quite dramatically change those, change the externalities that they're causing, just on the basis of that knowledge. So in some context, yes, we need regulation, we need changes in incentives to internalize externalities, but actually we've found in quite a few organizations that those things aren't needed, just the knowledge is enough to change the outcomes.
Thank you all, four of you, very much indeed.